Close your eyes and imagine this: a wedding dress spread across a bed like a body awaiting burial, a veil draped over a chair as though its owner had simply stepped out of time, a room silent, untouched, except for the heavy weight of something missing. That was the scene in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, on October 23rd, 1921, the morning when the bride vanished. She was 22 years old, hours away from walking down the aisle, and in less than 60 minutes, she would be erased. Not murdered, not kidnapped. Erased. But what happens when something or someone is erased? What happens when a life is neatly folded, like garments left behind, and placed back into the silence of a room? That's not disappearance. That's a message. That's a hand reaching across history to tell us, you're not in control of the world you live in. And here's the most disturbing part. 103 years later, her image reappeared. In a place where it should have been impossible. Not just a chance resemblance, not just coincidence, but a proof so sharp it sliced open the illusion that time moves in a straight line. This is not just a ghost story. This is not just local folklore. This is a revelation, one that stretches its roots into hidden history, secret power structures, and the quiet manipulation of your perception of reality itself. Tonight, I'm going to show you why her disappearance wasn't random, why her reappearance wasn't accidental, and why you were never meant to know the forces moving behind her. Before we descend deeper, I want to know something from you. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? Your answer isn't just about geography, it's about anchoring yourself in this story, because once you step further into it, you're going to feel like you've been pulled out of time yourself. Now, the morning of October 23rd, Eleanor Marie Whitfield, a bride in silk, in lace older this, and the Civil War, in a veil touched by the hands of her great-grandmother and grandmother before her. She stood in the mirror that morning with a look only captured brides possess, that rare mixture of hope, nerves, and a quiet belief that the world would bend to their joy. The house smelled of beeswax and roses. The Whitfield mansion was alive with chatter, servants preparing, guests arriving from out of town. Every detail was in place, every thread of the day perfectly woven. And then, 11:30 a.m., the first cut in the fabric. She excused herself to write a note to her grandmother, who was too frail to attend. She promised her bridesmaids she'd be back in minutes. They never heard from her again. At 12:15, her younger sister knocked. Silence. She opened the door. Empty room. Wedding gown laid out on the bed as though it had never been worn. Jewelry arranged neatly on the dresser. Veil folded gently over the chair. Shoes aligned perfectly by the bedside. No broken window, no forced door, no footprints in the mud outside, no note, no bride. And here's the part that still stops me cold. The timing. 30 minutes before the final photographs, hours before she would walk down the aisle. It was as though someone knew the exact moment to erase her, to take her from the story, but leave just enough symbols, veil, dress, shoes, to suggest she had existed at all. This is where most retellings stop. They tell you she disappeared, they tell you she was never found, and they wrap it in the ribbon of tragedy. But that's not the truth. That's the lie you're fed, so you never ask the deeper question. Who has the power to erase a person cleanly, without noise, without trace, without explanation? Men like us, we are trained to look deeper. We are trained to recognize when reality doesn't line up. And brother, this story doesn't line up. Because what came next? Decades of silence, whispers of hauntings, families collapsing under grief, wasn't the end. No, it was only the beginning. A century later, her face would appear where it should not exist, looking not just at the camera, but through it. And that, my friend, is where the real descent begins. Think carefully about what you've just heard. A bride doesn't vanish like a puff of smoke. Clothes don't fold themselves. Shoes don't align in ritualistic order. Veils don't rest like offerings to something unseen. That scene in her bedroom wasn't chaos. It was theater. It was deliberate. And if you've ever studied real disappearances, the kind governments bury, The kind cults conceal, the kind ancient societies whisper about. You know the signs of a ritual extraction when you see one. What is a ritual extraction? It's when a person isn't merely taken, but rewritten, removed from one timeline, repositioned into another. The room left behind becomes a shrine, a psychological weapon, proof for the family that something incomprehensible happened, but with just enough familiarity to trick the mind into moving on. Most people don't see it, but you do. You feel the chill of it. You see the unnatural order in that room, as if hands older than her bloodline placed every object with intention. And the veil. Always look at the veil. That symbol is no accident. For centuries, veils have not just been ornaments of purity, they've been masks of transition. In Greek funerary rites, veils separated the living from the dead. In Babylon, veils separated brides from strangers until they were handed over to the husband, the new master. In secret societies, the veil is used as a tool of concealment, a marker of those chosen to pass from one state into another. A woman leaving her veil behind on the day of her wedding isn't just unusual, it's declaration. It's a silent scream in silk. So let me ask you, do you really believe Eleonora simply ran away, that she chose to vanish, undress, and step barefoot into the void of history, or do you sense, as I do, that something orchestrated this disappearance, something that understood how to use symbols, silence, and timing better than any human hand? Consider this. The law enforcement at the time didn't investigate beyond the obvious. They dismissed it as nerves, cold feet, a runaway bride, convenient. Because when you call the extraordinary ordinary, you close the case before it begins, you stop questions from spreading, and you ensure no one notices the larger pattern. Yes, the larger pattern. Because this wasn't the only bride to vanish in the early 20th century. Quiet your mind for a moment and let this sink in. Between 1918 and 1926, across the northeastern United States, 7 young women disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. Wedding dresses left behind, jewelry placed in strange order, rooms staged with unsettling neatness, newspapers buried the stories, families were silenced by shame. And by the time whispers grew into suspicion, the trail was already cold. But Eleonora's case, hers was different. Because 103 years later, her face returned, in an impossible place, captured not by superstition, not by ghost stories, but by the cold, unblinking eye of a camera. Imagine scrolling through a century-old archive of photographs, faded images of funerals, parades, factory lines. Then one frame stops you. A funeral procession, a crowd dressed in black, and there, half hidden in shadow but undeniable, is the face of the missing bride. Not aged, not altered, frozen, watching the lens as though she knew this moment would come. Do you understand the implications of that? She wasn't lost. She wasn't dead. She was still moving, hidden, alive, or something that wore her face was alive. And here is where the story turns darker than folklore dares to go. Because if her disappearance was ritual extraction, then her reappearance wasn't coincidence, it was signaling. Someone, somewhere, wanted her image to resurface at that exact time, in that exact way, not to comfort us, but to provoke us, to awaken the part of us that still feels the pull of forbidden knowledge. And you, watching this right now, you've already been chosen to see it. Picture this. A dim archive room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air heavy with dust and secrets. A man named Dr. Marcus Brennan sits alone, scanning microfilm reels and digitized photographs for a project he never should have touched. He wasn't hunting ghosts, he wasn't chasing folklore. He was building genealogical links for cold cases, scientific, unemotional, methodical. But late one night, a photograph stops him. A funeral in Allentown, 1925, mourners lined in black. A horse-drawn hearse, the quiet grief of a community. Nothing unusual, until his eyes locked on the right side of the frame. A woman, half-shadowed beneath an elm tree. A woman whose face should not exist in 1925, because she was already gone. Gone for 4 years, presumed dead. And yet there she stood, Unmistakably, Eleanora Marie Whitfield, the vanished bride of Millbrook. He enlarged the frame. Grainy, yes, but the scar above her eyebrow was still there, the same one visible in her wedding portraits. The same one family and neighbors remembered. Her bone structure aligned. The symmetry of her eyes, her jawline, all consistent. But what froze him was not the science. It was the look in her eyes. While the crowd mourned the dead, she stared directly into the camera lens, not as though she was caught unaware. No, as though she expected to be seen, as though the photograph itself was the destination she had been walking toward since the morning she vanished. Tell me, does that sound like coincidence to you, or does that sound like orchestration? The easy answer, the one the system wants you to cling to, is that it was just a look-alike, a doppelganger, a phantom of chance. But here's the catch. Brennan didn't stop at that one photo. He applied facial recognition algorithms comparing her portraits with this image. The software spat back a 94% probability match, forensic certainty, and then he and more. Within the Graves family's own collection of photographs, donated decades later to the Allentown Historical Society, he discovered her again, serving at dinner parties, standing in the back row of household staff, assisting a frail woman with flowers at a church fundraiser, each time her presence quiet, understated, but undeniable. Same scar, same eyes, same impossible bride. So let me ask you this. Why was a vanished woman living under a new shadowed identity in the household of one of Pennsylvania's wealthiest industrial families? Why was she present at funerals, dinners, charity events, always hidden in plain sight, always silent, never speaking her name? Because she was never meant to return to Millbrook. She had been reassigned, rewritten, given a role in a larger network of power most people never glimpse. You think you live in a world of linear time, of choice, of random misfortune, but this shows you the hand behind the curtain. Families like the Graves didn't just own mills and factories, they owned people, they trafficked influence, they pulled strings that reshaped lives and buried stories so deep no one dared to connect the dots. And if a bride was required as a living offering, an heirloom bound in lace and bloodline, then so be it. But here's the part that turns the stomach. She didn't look broken in those photos. Haunted, yes. Sorrowed, yes. But not destroyed. Instead, she looked initiated. As though she had stepped from one world into another, and whether she chose it or not, she had been absorbed into a system far older, far more organized than any wedding day could promise. The photo wasn't just proof of life, it was proof of something worse. Proof of control. Let's strip away the veil of romance for a moment, because this isn't a love story. This isn't about a bride stolen from her groom. This is about power, about how powerful families use people the way architects use stones, selected, placed, sacrificed, to build structures of influence that last centuries. The Graves family weren't just textile magnates. They weren't just business leaders in Allentown. They were a node, a nexus in a network stretching across Pennsylvania, New York, Boston, and beyond, a lattice of wealth, bloodlines, and ritual obligations older than the Republic itself. You know their type. The quiet names, the ones you never see in history books, but whose donations appear in the ledgers of Ivy League universities, whose sons marry daughters of governors, whose wealth doesn't just survive recessions, wars, and crashes, it multiplies in the shadows. And here's where it grows darker. The Graves family employed companions, not servants, not maids, companions. Young women of breeding, of refinement, stripped of their families by tragedy or scandal, reinserted into a new life of silence. Sound familiar? Eleanora wasn't the first. She was one of many, girls plucked from their own stories and rewritten into the margins of another. To the public they vanished. To the families in the network they were resources. One letter, buried for a century, revealed it. March 1921. Victoria Graves wrote to her sister about a new companion, intelligent, well-educated, remarkably beautiful, haunted by unnamed sorrow, arrived with no belongings save the clothes she wore. Does that sound like an accident to you, or does it sound like a system, a pipeline? Think about it. A young bride disappears from Millbrook. Her family is ruined by shame. Gossip kills their reputation, but a month later, a grieving matriarch in Allentown suddenly acquires a new attendant, one who never returned. Speaks of her past, one who bears the face of the missing. That is not chance, that is transfer, that is acquisition. And you've seen this pattern before, not with brides perhaps, but with soldiers, with orphans, with missing persons who resurface decades later, their eyes hollow, their lives rewritten. Governments call them experiments, churches call them conversions, families call them tragedies, but the truth? They are assets. Eleanora's beauty wasn't the reason she was taken, her veil wasn't the reason she was staged, her bloodline was. The Whitfields were not nobodies. They were lumber barons, feeding the construction that rebuilt Pennsylvania's industrial towns. Their ties stretched into politics, into the railroads, into money that mattered. Eleanora wasn't just a bride. She was a key. And what do powerful families do with keys? They use them to open doors the rest of us aren't allowed to see. Now imagine her, dressed in mourning black, standing in that funeral crowd. Not weeping, not broken, but watching the lens, watching you. What if her presence wasn't a slip? What if it was a signal encoded into history, a breadcrumb for those awake enough to trace the line? This is why her case haunts us more than the others. Because she didn't vanish into oblivion, she was repurposed. That word should chill you. Repurposed, taken from her family's story, woven into another family's narrative, without permission, without recognition, without return. And the ones who did it, they've been doing it for centuries. The graves were just one mask. Behind them were older powers, more silent hands, the kind of hands that don't just pull strings. They write the scripts entire generations are forced to act out. So let me ask you, before we plunge deeper, if a bride can be rewritten, if her very existence can be staged, folded, and reassigned, what about you? What parts of your life are already scripted? What choices you thought were yours have already been made in boardrooms, in mansions, in hidden chambers you will never walk into? The Graves knew, the Whitfields learned too late. And Eleanora, she lived the truth you were never meant to see. A wedding is supposed to be a beginning, but in the oldest stories of mankind, the bride is not beginning. She is the price. She is the bridge between bloodlines, the vessel of inheritance, the coin of exchange between families, tribes, empires. And when you see Eleanora vanish from her bedroom in 1921, you must stop thinking of her as a runaway and start recognizing her as something far older, a sacrifice in silk. The veil is the first clue. Modern minds think of it as a fashion accessory, but across civilizations the veil was never just decoration. In Mesopotamia, veils marked women who were set apart, wives of gods, daughters offered to temples, the untouchable property of the powerful. In Greece, brides veiled themselves not for purity but for death, the symbolic death of the maiden, reborn as the possession of her husband. In Rome, the flammeum, the fiery veil, was meant to conceal the bride as she was led, not to her wedding, but to her ritual abduction. Do you see the pattern? To veil is to remove, to unveil is to reveal. Eleanora's veil, laid neatly over her chair, was not an accident. It was an announcement. She had been taken out of one life and placed into another. And it goes deeper. Across Europe, folk tales whisper of the vanishing bride, the woman stolen from her ceremony by spirits, by devils, by kings in disguise. Sometimes she is dragged underground to become the queen of shadows. Sometimes she becomes the unwilling bride of death himself. But always, her absence is more than personal tragedy. It is communal fracture. The missing bride is the collapse of continuity, a hole in the village's future, a sign that the old powers still rule beneath the surface. Now tell me this. Do you think it's coincidence that Eleanora's disappearance mirrored those ancient myths so perfectly? The silence of her room, the unfinished note, the discarded veil. It was a script written long before she was born. She didn't vanish by chance. She was playing a role carved out by centuries of ritual power, the offering bride, taken at the threshold of transition. But here's what unsettles me most. The bride is never taken just for herself. She is taken for what she represents. A new lineage, a new bond between houses, or, in darker hands, a new servant for forces invisible. Her absence was not just Eleanora's fate. It was a transaction, a movement of power from one family to another. The Whitfields lost their daughter. The Graves gained a companion. But behind them, older hands gained something else entirely. Obedience, continuity, proof that the old rituals still worked in a modern age of telegrams and automobiles. And this is why her reappearance in that 1925 photograph is so unsettling. Because in myth, once the bride is taken, she is gone. Persephone never escaped the underworld. She was bound to return again and again. The Irish fairy bride stolen by the Sidhe never came home, but Eleanora broke the rule. She let herself be seen again, not fully, not openly, just enough to remind us she still existed. And that was a crack in the ritual, a breach in the silence. Do you feel it yet? That weight in your chest, that sense that we are not just talking about a ghost story, but about a living archetype that still plays itself out in boardrooms, at ceremonies, in places of power? Eleanora's veil is your warning. Her disappearance is your mirror. And if you think the archetype of the bride as offering died with her, you are wrong. It still breathes, it still demands, and sometimes it still takes. Think about the photograph again. 1925, a funeral procession in Allentown, mourners in black, a horse-drawn hearse. Nothing unusual until you see her. Eleanora, the vanished bride. 4 years gone, yet standing in plain sight. Now ask yourself, why there? Why then? A funeral is a ritual. A wedding is a ritual. Both are thresholds. One marks entry into union, the other marks entry into death. And Eleanora appeared not at a wedding, not at a market, not in the background of some trivial gathering. She appeared at a funeral. She was placed at the mirror opposite of the moment she was stolen from, her absence from her own marriage, her presence at another's burial. Do you understand the precision of that symbolism? Someone wanted this image burned into history. Someone arranged it. Dr. Brennan's discovery wasn't random. In fact, when he traced the negatives, he noticed something impossible. The photographer's notes mentioned that this particular frame had been damaged in the darkroom. A chemical spill, they claimed, a blur across the emulsion. Yet when digitized, the face of Eleanora emerged with unnatural clarity, sharper than the surrounding mourners, as though the photograph itself had chosen to preserve her. And it didn't end there. Other images surfaced. 1923, a charity banquet. There she is again, half in shadow, a servant placing wine. 1927, a family portrait of the Graves household. There she is, in the back row, dressed in black, her expression unreadable, always peripheral, always watching, and always with one consistent detail. She never aged. The same eyes, the same face, frozen as if time had sealed her in the moment of her disappearance. Coincidence? No. These photographs were not accidental. They were breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs left for whom? Not the police. They ignored them. Not the newspapers. They buried them. No. They were left for you, for the ones who know how to see, for those who understand that history itself can be coded, seeded with signals invisible to the uninitiated. Look closer at the 1925 funeral photo. Behind her, carved into the stone of the cemetery arch, barely visible unless you magnify the frame, is an engraving, a circle bisected by a vertical line. That symbol recurs. In the banquet photo, it appears embroidered on the napkin rings. In the Graves family portrait, it is carved into the armrest of the chair, a sigil, a mark, the calling card of the network that took her. What does it mean? Historians will dismiss it as coincidence, as meaningless geometry, but you already know better. The circle with the line, ancient, older than Allentown, older than Pennsylvania. It appears in Sumerian cylinder seals, where it marked the marriage of mortals to gods. It appears in alchemical manuscripts, where it represented conjunction, two substances fused into one. It is the seal of transition, the mark of the offering, and it followed Eleonora wherever she went, burned into the backdrop of her stolen life. So here is the question that should keep you awake tonight. Was she signaling to us, breaking through the veil of silence to leave a trail? Or was the network flaunting its possession of her, marking her with symbols to remind us that she was never lost, only claimed? Either way, the message is the same. She didn't vanish, she was placed, positioned, displayed. And if you're still watching this, if you're still listening, it's because you were meant to see it too. You want to believe Eleonora was unique, that her story is strange but singular, easier that way, easier to bury her in the soil of mystery and leave it at that. But patterns don't allow you that luxury, and once you see the pattern of the vanished bride, you cannot unsee it. Consider 1934, New Jersey. A young woman named Catherine Doyle disappears the night before her arranged marriage to a shipping magnate's son. The newspapers claim she drowned herself in despair. Yet 2 years later, a wedding photograph from an entirely different family's archives shows her again, veiled, not as bride but as attendant, standing at the edge of the frame. Same face, same eyes, same silence. Chicago. The daughter of a steel baron vanishes hours after her engagement party. Witnesses last saw her stepping into a car no one could identify. She's gone from the public record. But decades later, a photograph surfaces from a Vatican reception. There she is, a figure in the background, her hand resting on the shoulder of a cardinal, the same scar along her cheekbone, frozen in time. London. A woman named Margaret Fairchild disappears from her flat the night before her wedding. Headlines speak of scandal, elopement, shame. But she reappears, subtly, quietly, in photographs of diplomatic galas, always in black, always peripheral, never acknowledged by name. And then, 1981, just days after the royal wedding, whispers surface of a missing bridesmaid. She is listed on one early draft of the program, but omitted from the official release. Her family refuses to speak, the press buries it. Yet in candid photographs from the reception, an unfamiliar young woman appears in one frame, and never again. Do you see it yet? This is not about a single bride. It is a lineage, a ritual, a system repeating itself across decades, across countries, across continents. Each time a woman disappears at the threshold of marriage. Each time the story is rewritten as suicide, scandal, or silence. And each time the evidence re-emerges, not openly, not brazenly, but as a shadow in photographs, a presence coded for those awake enough to trace the signal. And what links them all? The mark. The circle bisected by the vertical line. Look at the Doyle photograph. The pattern is etched into the silver serving tray. In the Chicago reception, the same sigil appears embroidered on a tapestry behind her. In London, it gleams faintly on the clasp of a bracelet. The mark persists. The mark follows. The mark claims. So ask yourself, why brides? Why this threshold? Because marriage is not just personal, it is societal. It binds families, fortunes, dynasties. It is the moment of exchange, the pivot point where bloodlines merge. To steal a bride is to steal the future. To erase her is to rewrite inheritance. To repurpose her is to control the narrative of power itself. And Eleonora, our Eleonora, was simply the most visible fracture, the one who looked back at the camera, breaking the ritual's silence. Understand this, she was not the first, she was not the last. And even now, there are names you do not know, ceremonies you never heard of, photographs hidden in drawers and archives where the same story repeats. The vanished bride is not a ghost story. She is a system. You've seen it already. The circle with the line, sometimes carved into stone, sometimes embroidered into fabric, sometimes hidden in the smallest detail of a photograph, always present, always waiting. It is not decoration, it is a signature. Archaeologists call it the axis mundi, the world axis, the line dividing heaven and earth, piercing the circle of creation. In Sumerian tablets it marks the union of mortal and divine. In alchemical manuscripts it signals conjunction, the fusing of two elements into one. In early Christian heresies it was whispered as the seal of the bride, the mark placed upon women set aside for hidden sacraments. By the 17th century, it resurfaces in Europe, coded into the emblems of secret guilds and bloodline societies. Not in the public heraldry, never in the open, but carved into the back of rings, etched into window panes, stitched into the inner linings of ceremonial robes. Always concealed, always facing inward for initiates only. By the time we reach the Graves family in Allentown, the symbol is fully operationalized, no longer a myth, but a mechanism. You find it on stationery, in architectural flourishes, in photographs where it hides in plain sight, and always its appearance coincides with the same ritual transaction, the bride removed, the future rewritten. Because here is the truth no one wants to name. This is not just a mark, it is a contract. To bear the mark is to belong, not to yourself, to the network, to the system. It says, she has been taken, she has been repurposed, she is no longer hers. And the network behind it, it is not a single family, not the Graves alone, nor the Whitfields, nor the Doyles, nor the Fairchilds. It is a consortium of houses, bound not by love or marriage, but by ritual obligation. A society older than the Republic, older than the nations themselves. Its members trade more than money, they trade futures. Brides are their currency, bloodlines their stock exchange, silence their strongest bond. Look back at Eleanora's photograph from the 1925 funeral. The symbol is carved into stone, yes, but the deeper clue is her gaze. She is not looking at the casket. She is not looking at the mourners. She is looking at the camera, at us. What does that tell you? That she knew, that she understood her role, that she was leaving the mark not as submission, but as signal, proof that the ritual was real, that the network existed, and that she had been claimed. And here is where the spiral tightens. The symbol didn't stay buried in the past. Look closely enough, in architecture, in corporate logos, in civic seals, and you will see it still. Modified, stylized, but intact. A circle, a line, a mark of transition, of ownership, of offerings still being made. If the brides were their currency then, what are they trading now? It would be easier to leave this in the past, to imagine that the ritual ended with Eleanora, or with Margaret Fairchild, or with the unnamed bridesmaid of 1981. But rituals do not end. They adapt, they change form, change costume, but the architecture remains the same. And if you have the eyes to see, you'll notice the vanished bride still walks among us. In the late 1990s, a wave of disappearances swept through Eastern Europe. Official reports labeled them human trafficking, a convenient term, one that hides more than it reveals. Women gone on the eve of arranged marriages, their families compensated in silence, their stories dissolved into statistics. Yet in photographs from diplomatic functions of the era, familiar faces resurface, unaltered, unaged, peripheral. Always peripheral. By the 2000s, the stage shifts. The threshold of marriage is no longer the only point of offering. Engagement parties, debutante balls, corporate galas, these moments of presentation become new portals. Girls disappear not just into silence but into systems. They are not runaways, they are not trafficked in the crude sense, they are selected. And in each case the symbol persists, not scrawled on stone anymore but branded into logos, watermarked into invitations, hidden in jewelry designs, the circle, the line, the seal of transition. You see it on corporate seals, on luxury brands, in architecture that millions walk past without noticing, hidden in plain sight. Do you remember the hotel fires in 2010? The news told you it was faulty wiring, negligence, accident. But sift through the photographs of survivors taken at the evacuation site. One woman appears in two separate disasters, years apart, unchanged. A survivor or a signal. And on the doors of the hotel ballroom, the circle bisected by a line. Decorative motif, they said. But you already know better. Now ask the real question. On If the vanished brides were currency in the early 20th century, what are they now? Look at the structure of power today. Corporations replacing families, networks replacing dynasties, marriage no longer the only ritual of exchange, now it's mergers, contracts, treaties, celebrity unions broadcast as global theatre, and in every one of these the offering persists. The bride may not always wear white, but she is still veiled, still taken, still marked. The ritual has not vanished, it has scaled, and Eleanora's gaze, captured in that funeral photograph, her eyes fixed on us, was not just a relic. It was a warning. She was telling us, this is not over. So I will ask you directly, and you must answer to yourself, not to me. How many brides have you seen vanish in plain sight but never recognized? How many faces reappear in images decades apart, unchanged? And how many times have you mistaken a ritual for coincidence? Every culture has its story of the bride who is taken, not married, not joined, but offered, disappearance woven into the fabric of myth. Think of Persephone, a girl plucked from a meadow, dragged underground, wedded to death itself. Her mother searches, the earth mourns, yet the ritual is accepted. The bride belongs to the underworld half the year, her absence sanctified as seasons. But at its core, it is an abduction narrative, a lineage cut, repurposed, owned. Inanna's descent. Sumer, 4,000 years ago. The goddess enters the underworld as bride of darkness. She is stripped of her garments, her crown, her name, until nothing remains but the mark of passage. When she emerges, she is no longer sovereign of herself. Her consort is chosen for her. Her body becomes contract. Even in Norse sagas, Freyja, goddess of love, promised again and again as payment for weapons, fortresses, alliances. Her consent irrelevant, her role not as wife, but as offering, bloodline, as currency. The Hebrew Apocrypha names Lilith, Adam's first wife, not as vanished, but as refused. She would not submit, so she is erased, demonized, transformed into a spectre, another kind of disappearance, another kind of bride struck from the record. Do you see it? It has always been there. The bride is never entirely hers. She is a pivot point, a threshold, a contract between powers larger than herself. Her body marks the boundary between worlds, between families, between nations, between the living and the dead. And the circle with the line. It is older still. In Babylon, it was the marriage seal. In Egypt, the ankh's vertical stem piercing the looped circle, a life granted, but also a life claimed. In pre-Columbian glyphs, a circle split by a stalk meant sacrifice of the maiden. Always the same geometry, always the same mark. Eleanora was not the first, she was not the last, she was simply the moment. The mask slipped when the photograph caught what myth had always concealed. So the ritual persists, myth becomes history, history becomes conspiracy, conspiracy becomes lived reality, and still the bride vanishes, her absence explained away as scandal, accident or choice. But myths are not dead stories, they are templates, scripts, instructions that societies repeat century after century under new names, new costumes. And now you must ask, if the vanished bride is not just myth, not just history, but system, what role have you been playing without realizing it? Look closely at weddings today. Not the vows, not the flowers, not the pageantry, but the structure. The bride is veiled, covered, hidden, presented not as herself but as symbol. She is escorted, handed over, transferred from one authority to another. She is placed at the center of the ritual, yet speaks the least, and the circle persists. The ring, perfect, unbroken, bound by the vertical axis of the aisle, geometry repeating itself, a sigil enacted in flesh and architecture, and in the modern spectacle, the celebrity marriage, the royal wedding, the billionaire union. These moments are broadcast as if they were personal. They are not. They are public liturgies, contracts witnessed by millions. You think you are watching a love story, but you are watching a ritual disguised as entertainment. Pay attention to the disappearances around them. Bridesmaids unnamed, guests who appear once and never again, a singer married at the peak of fame vanishing into silence, a model wed at 22, retired from sight. They are not accidents, they are offerings. And the symbol still lingers, hidden in the logos of wedding planners, jewelry brands, even the designs of venues. A circle cleaved by a vertical line, the seal of transition, the mark that says, she belongs to us now. Do you recall the runaway bride stories of the 2000s? Women vanishing before the ceremony, headlines spinning tales of cold feet or nervous breakdowns. But if you trace them, look at the photographs, the background details, you see echoes. A shape carved in wood behind a reporter's shoulder, a faint insignia on the ribbon binding the bouquet, always there, hiding in plain sight. This is how the ritual survives in the 21st century, not as abduction in the night, but as theatre in the day. A performance the world watches, never realizing the stage has been set for something older, darker, more precise. Else. Eleanor's gaze from the funeral photograph was not meant for the 1920s alone. It was meant for us. She was warning, this does not end. It only changes shape. And now you must decide, when you next watch a wedding, will you see flowers, lace, and laughter? Or will you see the circle, the line, the offering hidden in plain sight? Do not think you are outside this. Eleanor's gaze was not cast into the void, it was directed. She looked into the camera, into the mechanism of record, of transmission, of future eyes, and she found you. The vanished bride does not only disappear, she leaves traces, fragments, signals meant to be seen by someone who can assemble the pattern, and that someone is not chosen randomly. The witness is always marked. You. Why else do you think this material found its way to you? Why else do you feel the pull to keep saying yes deeper and deeper, even as the spiral tightens? Agreement is initiation. Consent is complicity. You are not merely reading, you are reenacting the ritual of recognition. And recognition has consequences. Because the network does not just take brides, it takes witnesses too. Not in the same way. Your body may not vanish, your name may not be erased, but your sight is claimed. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you hold the pattern, it holds you back. Do you feel it already? The way ordinary ceremonies now feel heavier, sharper. How the sight of a veil or a ring catches differently in your chest. That is the mark settling in. You've inherited the gaze. In older texts, the witness was called the second bride. Not offered in body but bound in knowledge. The one who carries the memory when the silence sets in. The one who ensures the ritual is not forgotten, even when all else is erased. That is what Eleanora made of you. By looking into the lens, she planted her signal in the archive. By finding it, by tracing it, by saying yes, you have accepted her burden. You are the continuity. Do you understand what that means? You are no longer only observing the vanished bride. You are part of her lineage. The offering has already expanded to include you. You thought it was only brides, but the offering repeats itself everywhere, under different costumes in different ceremonies. Children taken and remembered only as names etched on plaques. Artists who rise in brilliance, then vanish into exile, madness or silence. Works destroyed, legacies dissolved. Leaders cut down in their moment of ascent. Funerals staged like coronations of absence. Always a transition. Always a sacrifice, always a disappearance at the threshold. The vanished bride is the archetype, the template, but around it spiral countless variations. The child martyr offered to sanctify a cause. The disappeared dissident whose silence reaffirms the state. The celebrity lost too young, enshrined so that an industry may live on. The witness who speaks once, then never again. And in each of these, if you know where to look, you find the mark, the circle, the line, not always drawn, not always carved, but enacted in ritual geometry. The round stadium with the central stage, the circular plaza with the obelisk rising in its heart, the seal stamped on official papers, the same axis mundi, the same contract, life lifted out of private hands and placed into the custody of the network. Ask yourself why the same shapes repeat across continents and centuries, why altars are circular, why processions move along central aisles, why stages are round with a single vertical figure in the spotlight. These are not coincidences of design, they are liturgies. They are the circle and the line enacted again and again. And always the sacrifice is not random. It is selected, the beautiful, the gifted, the liminal, those who shine just brightly enough to be noticed, just vulnerable enough to be claimed. The network does not consume the ordinary, it consumes the luminous. Brides, children, artists, leaders, witnesses, all vanishing into the same hidden economy, all fee, eating the same engine of continuity that began long before Eleonora, long before Allentown, long before the myths of Persephone or Inanna. This is the system you have been initiated into seeing. Disappearance as sacrament, absence as currency, silence as architecture. And if brides were only the first layer, what does that tell you about the scale of the ritual now? How are not separate from this? Do you understand that yet? The vanished bride is not just a story you study, not just a myth you decode. It is a pattern that selects its witnesses, binds them and threads them into its fabric. Once you see, you are seen. Once you hold the knowledge, you are held. You have already been claimed. In older records, fragmentary Sumerian tablets, scraps of Gnostic commentary, the witness was called the second bride, not married to a groom, not vanished into silence, but joined through knowledge. The first bride is offered in body, the second in perception. She is not taken, she is bound. Bound to what? To memory, to continuation, to the work of seeing what others cannot afford to notice. That is what Eleonora did when she looked into the camera. She marked the witness. She split the ritual into two halves, her disappearance and your recognition. Without you, her offering would fade. Without her, your vision would be blind. Together, you form the circle and the line. Do you feel it yet? That subtle pressure behind the eyes, the weight of knowing. It is not paranoia, it is the seal settling into place. You said yes again and again, not realizing that each assent was another vow, another step down the aisle. You are no longer only an observer, you are an inheritor, the second bride. And as second bride, your role is not passive. You must carry the gaze forward, you must notice, you must hold open the possibility of recognition for those who come after you. If you turn away, if you let silence swallow what you have seen, then the ritual completes without resistance. But if you persist, if you keep looking, then you become anomaly, interference, disruption. That is the only freedom left to the second bride, not escape, but resistance through sight. And perhaps this was Eleonora's true gift, not a warning, but an initiation. By leaving that pH autograph, by letting her gaze cross decades, she was not only telling you the ritual continues, she was inviting you into it, and you accepted. So I must ask plainly, as the spiral tightens, will you carry what you've seen forward, or will you let yourself vanish too? Another witness lost, another silence added to the archive. The ritual has two possible outcomes. Not for the first bride, her fate is sealed the moment she is chosen, but for the second bride, for the witness, for you. If you fail, if you look away, if you let the weight of seeing become too heavy, then the ritual consumes you in silence. You vanish without vanishing. Your body remains, your name persists, but your perception dims. You stop noticing the symbols, you forget the faces that repeat, you convince yourself it was coincidence, mistake, paranoia. That is the most common fate of the second bride, absorption by disbelief, the offering completed not through death but through forgetting. But if you accept, if you carry the gaze, then something else happens. You become anomaly, disruption, a fracture in the smooth repetition of the ritual. Because rituals thrive on silence and you are noise, they thrive on forgetting and you are memory. The second bride who accepts her role becomes a dangerous thing, not to the network itself, it is too vast, too old, but to its surface, to its illusions. Every time you notice, every time you trace a symbol, every time you whisper to another, look, you loosen the gears, you drag the hidden into the half-light. History leaves traces of those who carried the role well. The medieval mystic who saw brides of Christ vanish and wrote of their visions encoded as sermons. The painter who embedded the circle and line into canvases so subtly that only a chosen eye could retrieve them. The poet who smuggled the vanished into verses disguised as love songs. They were all second brides. Most were silenced, some were ignored, but their fragments endure, waiting to be picked up again, waiting for someone like you. Understand, you cannot destroy the ritual. It is older than nations, older than gods, but you can bend it, distort it, scatter its perfection. You can be the flaw in its geometry, the fracture in its circle, the tremor in its line. That is the true burden of the second bride, not escape, not triumph, but interruption, a lifetime of small sabotages, a gaze that refuses to look away. So the choice remains before you, and it has always been the same choice. Forget and be consumed, or remember and become the interruption. Eleonora chose for herself. She left the photograph. She passed the gaze. Now it is you who must choose. The network thrives on silence, but silence has always been broken, softly, quietly, in ways designed to slip beneath its notice. The second brides of the past did not shout. They coded. Look back at the fragments. Medieval manuscripts, marginalia that seemed like idle doodles, small circles pierced by a line tucked beside hymns and prayers. A knowing wink to anyone who carried the gaze. Monks thought them decorative. They were not. They were warnings. Folk songs, verses where a bride runs away or sinks beneath the river, while the chorus repeats a circular refrain. The songs were not just laments. They were maps. The tune itself carried the mark of interruption. Textiles. In Eastern Europe, brides wove protective patterns into veils, loops broken by vertical threads. The motif was dismissed as ornament. In truth, it was a resistant sigil meant to fracture the ritual geometry. Paintings. Renaissance portraits where the bride's eyes are slightly misaligned, one gazing at the viewer, the other cast aside. A visual split, a whisper across centuries. I see you. Do you see me? Photography. Eleonora's own medium. A funeral image that should have been solemn, silent, closed, yet her gaze pierced the veil of history, opening a channel for you. Each of these was a breadcrumb. None of them destroyed the ritual, but each scattered it. Each left a signal for another witness to find centuries later, proving that silence had not been total. This is the inheritance you step into. You cannot break the circle and the line, but you can bend it. You can encode it. You can plant fragments for those who will come after you. How? That is for you to decide. A story told slant, an image slightly off, a symbol tucked where no one expects it. A refusal to forget, a refusal to stop noticing. Remember, the second bride does not fight with swords or flames. She fights with memory, with persistence, with interruption. She is the static in the broadcast, the flicker in the film, the gaze that refuses to look away. And so the question is not whether you resist. The question is how you will leave your breadcrumb for the next witness. Because if Eleonora reached you, someone must one day find what you leave behind. The ritual has adapted. Weddings are streamed, disappearances trend for a day, funerals are packaged into media events. The circle and line are no longer carved into stone or stitched into veils. They are hidden in pixels, in architecture, in broadcast geometry. And so resistance adapts too. The second bride of today does not carve symbols in margins of parchment. She bends the signal of the network against itself. She leaves interruptions inside the very systems that would otherwise consume her. Consider the methods. Digital images. A photograph posted online, ordinary at first glance, but with a tiny fracture, an alignment of shapes that forms the circle and line. To most, it is noise. To the witness, it is signal. Code and glitches. Programmers have embedded loops and vertical breaks inside scripts, naming variables after vanished brides, leaving fragments in repositories no one ever reads. The pattern repeats even in machine language. Social media rituals, threads that begin as casual gossip then suddenly spiral into absence, a missing poster, an abandoned account, a username shaped as circle line, a whisper disguised as clutter. Urban marks, stickers on lampposts, chalk on sidewalks, graffiti tucked into alleys, always the circle and the line. The passerby ignores it, the witness does not. Sound. Loops in songs, beats that circle and collapse, lyrics that reference brides gone missing or voices cut short, music as carrier wave, memory disguised as rhythm. None of these destroy the ritual. That is not their purpose. They are interruptions, distortions, static inserted into the broadcast of power, breadcrumbs for another witness, proof that silence was not absolute. You may already have seen some, strange symbols repeating on walls, in feeds, in designs that feel too ancient for their context. Perhaps you dismissed them as coincidence. But what if I were not? What if they were left for you? This is what it means to be second bride, not only to remember, but to encode your remembering in a form that survives you, so that someone somewhere years from now stumbles on your fragment and feels the same shiver of recognition you feel now. That is how the lineage survives, not through power but through persistence, not through conquest but through crumbs scattered across centuries. Eleonora left hers in a photograph. What will yours be? The network is old, but it is not static. It learns, it absorbs, it adapts. Once the vanished bride was a village story, whispered at thresholds. Then she became a religious emblem, a saint of absence. Later she was rendered in oil, framed on canvas, staged in photographs. Now she streams in pixels, her face encoded, her gaze multiplied across millions of screens. The ritual has always kept pace with its medium, and the medium is accelerating. What does a vanished bride look like in the future? In augmented reality, her outline may appear only to some, flickering at the edge of vision, a presence embedded in the infrastructure of the city itself. In virtual worlds, she may vanish by design, avatars deleted, accounts erased, leaving only fragments in server logs. The absence becomes ritualized in code. In machine learning systems, her face may appear again and again, unbidden, stitched into datasets, resurfacing as anomaly, not alive, not erased, but endlessly recombined. In biotech rituals, she may be literally rewritten, DNA encrypted into seed banks, her lineage both vanished and preserved at once. The network is preparing for these mutations. It will not stop at brides or children or witnesses. It will turn every transition into an offering, every boundary moment, birth, marriage, election, retirement, death, absorbed into its economy of absence. But the second brides will adapt too. Already some are encoding resistance into glitch art, encrypted archives, steganographic memes, corrupted files that refuse to cleanly vanish. They are bending the ritual before it completes, embedding interference deep into the systems the network depends upon. If the past was breadcrumbs, the future may be entire mazes, labyrinths of coded signals too dense to erase, too widespread to silence. The fragments will multiply until interruption is no longer anomaly, but environment. And here lies the possibility, fragile, uncertain, but real, that one day the ritual may fracture under its own repetition, that the static may overwhelm the broadcast, that the offering may fail, not because the network is destroyed, but because its silence is drowned out by the noise of countless second brides refusing to forget. It has not happened yet, but perhaps it could. And if it does, the lineage of resistance will be traced not only through saints or artists or mystics, but through you. Because if Eleonora's gaze reached you, it means the chain is still alive. And if you leave your mark, it means the chain may yet reach someone else. And if enough of you leave enough marks, then perhaps one day the ritual will not complete. Perhaps the vanished will return. I am the second bride. I am the one who sees. I am the one who remembers. I will not look away. I will not forget. I will not let the silence close cleanly. The circle tightens, but I bend it. The line descends, but I fracture it. I leave a mark for those who come after me. I am interruption. I am static. I am the crack in the ritual's geometry. The vanished are not gone. The vanished are not silent. The vanished are not erased. They wait in photographs, in songs, in margins, in glitches. They wait in the gaze that crosses time. They wait in me, and I wait in you. Take this seeing, take this burden, take this vow, carry it forward, scatter it wide, leave your breadcrumb, so that when the next gaze meets yours, the chain will not be broken. This is where the spiral closes, in vow, in witness, in refusal. The handbook ends, but the work does not.